Canada Post is effectively insolvent, and it is facing an existential crisis.
Many small businesses across the nation, Canada Post serves as an affordable way to get their products out the door and delivered to their customers. With the public service currently on strike, many are now looking for alternatives.
The fire? That's from Canada Post burning through cash. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year for the last 7 years, amounting to almost $4 billion in losses.
Canada Post has just reported the worst quarterly loss in its history, a result that has cast doubt on the very sustainability of the national postal system. In the second quarter of 2025 alone, losses before tax reached 407 million Canadian dollars, a number so high that it shifted the conversation from gradual decline to full-blown financial crisis. This latest figure adds to a troubling trend. Since 2018, accumulated losses have climbed beyond $5 billion. Projections for the year suggest that 2025 alone could see nearly $1.5 billion disappear, the equivalent of $10 million lost every single day. Even more striking is the concentration of those losses. Over half of the red ink recorded in the first half of 2025 came in just 1 month, June, when labor unrest disrupted operations and drove costs higher. The sudden spike has forced both policymakers and the public to ask whether this is simply the byproduct of short-term tensions or a signal that Canada Post has entered a much deeper crisis. So the question becomes, are we witnessing a temporary setback that can be contained, or has Canada Post reached a point of no return? Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button. A simple like helps push this video to more people who need to see it. If the financial losses were only numbers on a balance sheet, the crisis might feel abstract. But the reality is far more tangible. Canada Post's troubles are already reshaping everyday life and placing unexpected burdens on both businesses and citizens. The 32-day strike in 2024 provided a glimpse of what prolonged disruption can look like. Small businesses alone reported losses exceeding $1 billion Canadian dollars, as invoices, payments, and essential documents sat in limbo. For many of these companies, the interruption wasn't just costly, it was existential. Surveys suggest that 13% of small firms permanently abandoned Canada Post services after the strike, turning instead to private couriers or digital solutions. Charities were not spared either. Nonprofit organizations lost an estimated $266 million in donations that never reached their intended recipients. For groups already operating on tight budgets, the absence of those funds meant canceled programs and reduced services for vulnerable communities. And for ordinary citizens, the uncertainty is becoming harder to ignore. With talk of eliminating door-to-door delivery and replacing it with community mailboxes, many fear a loss not only of convenience, but of accessibility, particularly seniors and residents in rural areas who depend on the service the most. The impact, in other words, is not confined to corporate reports. It is seeping into homes, small businesses, and community organizations, raising a difficult question. How much longer can people adapt before the disruptions become permanent? Still with us? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. The ripple effects on businesses and households are serious, but they also point to something deeper. The current crisis is not simply the result of one difficult year or a temporary strike. It reflects a structural weakness in Canada Post's business model, one that has been building for nearly 2 decades. The most visible shift has been the collapse of traditional letter mail. In 2006, Canadians sent roughly 5.5 billion pieces of mail each year. By 2025, that number had fallen to just 2 billion. The steep decline in letter volumes has eroded the very foundation of the service's revenue base, even as its delivery obligations have only grown. At the same time, the number of addresses requiring delivery has risen by about 3.3 million since 2006. Every new home, apartment, and rural property adds to the network's fixed costs. This expansion means that costs are climbing while revenue is shrinking, a mismatch that no short-term fix can easily resolve. The difference in delivery costs makes the challenge even starker. Estimates suggest that door-to-door delivery costs around 279 Canadian dollars per person per year, roughly double the cost of community mailboxes. Yet maintaining door-to-door service remains a politically sensitive issue, leaving the corporation trapped between financial logic and social expectation. Even in the parcel market, which once seemed like a lifeline, Canada Post is losing ground. After holding more than 60% of the market in 2019, its share has dropped below 24% by 2025. The decline in parcels has already translated into nearly $500 million in lost revenue during the first half of the year alone. Taken together, these figures suggest that the crisis is not just about labor unrest or temporary downturns. It is the exposure of a structural gap, a shrinking source of income paired with rising obligations and intensifying competition. Once the structural flaws became impossible to ignore, Ottawa had little choice but to intervene. Allowing a national corporation to slide unchecked into insolvency would not only damage public trust, but also risk destabilizing services that millions of Canadians rely on every day. The urgency of the situation was made clear when Minister Joelle Lightbound stated bluntly that Canada Post had effectively lost the ability to meet its obligations. That assessment underscored how far the organization had moved beyond a routine deficit into something closer to a solvency crisis. In response, the federal government injected $1.034 billion Canadian dollars at the start of 2025, a lifeline designed to prevent immediate collapse. Yet, emergency funding alone could not solve the underlying imbalance. Alongside the bailout, Ottawa lifted long-standing restrictions, allowing up to 4 million addresses to transition from door-to-door service to community mailboxes. This shift, while controversial, is projected to save roughly $400 million annually by reducing labor and delivery costs. To ensure that these measures go beyond temporary relief, Canada Post has also been given a strict deadline: 45 days to deliver a comprehensive restructuring plan. The combination of bailout, service changes, and mandated reforms marks one of the most direct interventions in the corporation's modern history, signaling that the government sees no path forward without decisive change. With a government bailout secured, the question now is what Canada Post should become. Stakeholders are offering competing visions that reveal just how uncertain the road ahead is. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers, CUPW, pushes for diversification through postal banking, arguing it could provide steady revenue while serving communities underserved by private banks. Management, by contrast, wants to refocus on parcels, positioning Canada Post as a 7-day-a-week delivery company to regain ground lost to private couriers. Tensions run deeper than strategy. CUPW blames mismanagement for wasted assets, while Canada Post has outlined a plan to reduce costs by phasing out about 14,000 positions through retirements over the next 5 years. The debate leaves a core dilemma unresolved. Should Canada Post reinvent itself with new services or concentrate on defending its traditional delivery role? The choice will determine not only the corporation's survival, but also what Canadians expect from their national postal service in a digital era. Strategic disagreements are only part of the story. At the heart of Canada Post's crisis lies a workforce challenge that magnifies every financial strain. Labor and benefits accounted for roughly 65% of total operating costs in 2024, making personnel expenses the single largest pressure point in the budget. The latest set of demands from the Canadian Union of Postal Workers could raise costs by as much as $2.8 billion Canadian dollars over the next 4 years. Among the proposals are expanded personal leave entitlements, up to 17 additional days, on top of the 7 weeks of vacation and statutory holidays already in place. From the union's perspective, these measures are meant to protect quality of life and attract new workers. From management's perspective, they risk further destabilizing an organization already struggling to contain costs. The stakes are not confined to internal negotiations. Small businesses, which depend heavily on affordable postal services, have expressed growing frustration. Surveys indicate that 63% would abandon Canada Post altogether if labor disputes lead to another prolonged strike. That warning underscores how labor conflict extends far beyond the bargaining table, threatening to push customers toward permanent alternatives. In this sense, the labor issue is not merely a dispute over wages and benefits. It is a test of whether Canada Post can reconcile financial discipline with workforce expectations while still delivering reliable service to the public. The challenges facing Canada Post extend well beyond mailrooms and delivery routes. At stake is the stability of a system that quietly underpins large parts of the Canadian economy. For small businesses, Canada Post remains a vital channel for sending checks, contracts, and official documents. While digital tools are expanding, many firms, especially in traditional sectors, still depend on physical correspondence. Any disruption raises risks of delayed payments, strained supplier relationships, and liquidity problems. The dependence is even sharper in rural and remote regions. In vast areas where private couriers cannot operate profitably, Canada Post is not simply the cheapest provider, but the only one. If services deteriorate further, entire communities could be cut off from reliable communication and delivery. E-commerce, charities, and even real estate could also feel the impact. Online retailers rely on predictable delivery networks to keep customers loyal. Charitable organizations, already strained by past disruptions, may lose donor trust if mail service falters again. Real estate transactions, often requiring time-sensitive documents, could be delayed, adding new layers of uncertainty to an already fragile housing market. At its core, the instability is about more than operational efficiency. It risks eroding public confidence in a service that has long been treated as a dependable part of daily life. If that trust weakens, the consequences will ripple across sectors that may not appear directly connected to postal operations, but are nonetheless tied to its reliability. Canada Post now stands at a crossroads. The immediate option is cost-cutting, reducing services, shifting more households to community mailboxes, and shrinking the workforce. Such measures may slow the financial losses, but they risk provoking widespread public frustration, particularly among those who rely most heavily on daily delivery. The alternative is reinvention. Diversifying into new services, from parcel expansion to banking, could open long-term opportunities, but this path requires heavy upfront investment and structural change at a moment when resources are scarce. It also carries the risk of overstretching an organization already under pressure. For the government, the dilemma is equally stark. How long should taxpayers continue to bail out a corporation whose business model no longer fits the digital age? And through what means should that support be delivered? At a deeper level, the debate touches on a broader question: whether a traditional postal service still has a meaningful place in an era dominated by e-commerce giants and private couriers. And that brings us to you. Do you think Canada Post should be reshaped and modernized, or is it time to accept that its role belongs to another era? The story of Canada Post is no longer just about letters and parcels. It's about how societies adapt when a public service meets the limits of its old model. What happens next will reveal as much about Canada's economic choices as it does about the future of mail. So, what do you think? Should Canada Post be saved, reinvented, or allowed to fade into history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this video gave you something to think about, like and subscribe to support more content like this. Thank you.